check this. Can I rap with my people? Can I have a little convo with y'all before we get started with this video? Because your boy got a lot to say. So, a few weeks ago, here on the old internet, 50 Cent got everybody all in a tizzy, because it's 50 Cent, of course, with some comments that he made. He said that he thought that Eminem had a bigger impact on hip-hop than Jay-Z. Of course, everybody went crazy because, you know, we don't have a lot of cognitive thought on these apps. But when you think about it, this comment isn't as crazy as you think. I'm going to explain why. Now, we all know, before I get started, 50 Cent's bias here. Eminem and his boy, and 50 ain't never been on Sean Carter's Christmas card list, going way back to what the F is 50 Cent back in the day. But think about what he's saying when we talk about impact. Eminem, like him or not, and I know that conversation is debatable these days, when it comes to bringing mainstream eyeballs to hip-hop, no artist at the time, and maybe ever, was able to bring as many mainstream fans into hip-hop as Eminem did in the early 2000s. Well, yes, I know someone will say, well, white privilege. Absolutely white privilege. And Eminem will tell you that's true. Because the reason he was able to connect with that audience, mainstream America, is because he looked like mainstream America. And it only helped that he was the angry white kid that kind of vibed with what was going on in the culture at the time. So yes, when it comes to that impact, and we're talking about just mainstream eyeballs to hip-hop, 50 Cent's claim isn't that far off. Now, I know Eminem has had a few critics when it comes to his rapping style lately.
You wearing tight pants again, like a mannequin, dragging a wagon in, Dungeons and Dragons in, the hamper where my drawers been in, much to my chagrin, Scarlett O'Hara gone with the wind.
But beyond that, there's still no way you can question that he is a top 10 hip-hop artist. In my opinion, I think he's at like number 6 on my list. So when it comes to an impact in terms of mainstream, yeah, I think 50 is kind of right if he's talking about that. Now, if you're talking about an impact as far as hip-hop culture, if you're talking about mogul moves, if you're talking about more consistent albums, bigger albums, more notoriety as far as the genre itself, outside of just sales. I know y'all run to Wikipedia and just start pulling up numbers. Numbers doesn't always tell the story, children. When we're talking about actual impact on the genre itself, yeah, I'm going with Jay-Z. So what 50 Cent said isn't necessarily wrong. It's a matter of perspective. And I'm going to prove that today, because after that long-winded intro, we are going to break down and rank Slim Shady's LPs, solo LPs only, from bottom to top. Yep. What up, players? Thank you for joining me again for another edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions here on YouTube. Thank you for coming through and hanging out with your boy. And as we talked about earlier, yep, we're talking today about Eminem, a controversial character from jump. And it's funny how in modern days, we've kind of almost watered down his legacy, so to speak. He's an artist where I feel like you had to be there. You had to be there in late 99 and early 2000s to understand how big this dude was. And looking at the Eminem of today, it's kind of hard to kind of reconcile that. Interestingly, I used to say the same thing about Nas until his reinvention in recent years. Another artist you had to be there for. I think younger fans get it now with Nas. Don't quite get it with Eminem. Today we're going to talk about that and show why he was that dude in his era. But before we get started, you know what it is. Before we go into this too far, I want you to just go on up and hit that like button. It takes a fraction of a second and it helps us out. Please do that. Then, when we're done, make sure you share this video with your peeps and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I have pulled up, there's this thing where you can see the percentages, and like half of y'all, a percentage of y'all, like 50% of y'all who watch these videos have not subscribed yet. Oh, why not? Why not? You're watching the video every time, just hit the subscribe button. Do that right now. Yes. Take a second. Boom, boom, boom. Hit subscribe. Yep, you good. We good. Now we can get back to the video. And when the video's done, please drop a comment. Let us know what you think about the Eminem's legacy, ranking, and everything else. Because once those comments go up, I think YouTube is like, oh, people like this video. Let's share it. So let's get the convo going. And let's start with Eminem. As I said earlier, this album ranking is solo material only, so we won't do the collabo albums. No Bad Meets Evil album, even though that album is really good. And no collabos. As well as Eminem has been known to have a few kind of remix albums, like the Refill album after the Relapse album. We're only talking about the original versions of the album. So a Relapse will be Relapse. It's not the extra stuff. And same for a few things going on down the line. So join us. This one has some highs and boy, it's got some lows. Coming in at number 11 is probably not the album some of y'all thought. We'll get to that one in a second. But no, it's Encore. Okay, let me clear this up now. Because Encore, I thought, was long considered the worst Eminem album. But I've learned in recent years that a lot of people like it. And player, it must be the nostalgia, because it sure ain't the album. This album is a mess of just stuff everywhere. There are great moments for sure. A lot of the singles are very memorable releases. We were just talking on the Soul and Stereo Cypher on Facebook. If you like this video, go to Facebook, join the Soul and Stereo Cypher. I promise it's not lame like everything else on Facebook. But we were talking about albums that have a high regard, but when you look at it, only the singles are good and everything else is kind of That's this album right here. It is Eminem at his most annoyingly juvenile. He's all over the place. And despite some good singles, man, it's a mess. So I won't call it absolute atrocity. It's not that bad. But it is way, 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 way below where it should have been. Because it's just so overtly goofy. It's well documented that M was going through a lot of personal things at this time that really reflects in this album. So, although nostalgia might say that this is a great Eminem album because he was still, this is probably the last of the peak Eminem era albums. This one did not age well. Oh boy, this thing aged like the oldest of milk. Coming in at number 10 is the infamous Revival album. This is the album that has been proclaimed the worst album in the history of albums. And look, y'all, the album is not good. It's very mediocre. I wouldn't even say it's horrid. It's very mediocre. But this album is not nearly as bad as its reputation says it is. Here's the story behind it. So this is the album that dropped, and at the time when the Eminem backlash was getting kind of heavy. You had a new generation of hip-hop fans that were being introduced to this so-called legend that they really, Eminem had been out of the spotlight, remember. So they don't really know a lot about him. This is the first time they're hearing him, and they hear this album that's just so boring. I don't know what was going on. I have never heard an Eminem album this boring and lifeless. It's so dull. And the backlash was harsh. They were like, oh, this dude is a fraud. He's terrible. This album is horrendous. It's the worst album I've ever heard. Blah, 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 blah. Objectively speaking, this album is not horrific. It is a very, very below average Eminem album. But in the concept of album reviewing, I give it 3 stars because it's still listenable. Do I want to listen to it? Not really. But the production is fine. when he's rapping and focused, it's focused rapping. So it's not a poorly put together album. It's not like badly performed. It's not like whack bars. The things that would usually cause me to deduct scores from an album, it's not that. But do I want to listen to this album? Absolutely not, because it will make you fall asleep. Do not operate heavy machinery and listen to this album. It is ridiculously dull. That's why I have become a defender of this album somehow. Y'all know how it is on the internet. It's either a classic or trash, and if you don't say one or the other, you're defending it. I ain't defending this album. But I will say that it's not as objectively ridiculous as Encore. Encore has some fun moments, but then some dreck. This album doesn't have any dreck. It's just all sleepy time. So that's why I give it a little bit of an edge. If you're a person who's like, well, give me some good singles and a bunch of junk, you might put Encore above this. But to me, I'm like, across the board, this one is just a little bit more cohesive. It's just a little bit more well-structured. He seems like he put more effort into it. I just don't care about it. So this album ain't great, but I think we all knew that. Coming in at number 9 is Infinite, the actual first Eminem album. A lot of you hip-hop experts be running around on social media talking about, oh, y'all don't be knowing nothing. Y'all don't know. The actual first Eminem album is not Slim Shady. It is Infinite. The reason why many people don't know this is because, number one, it was released in '96, long before the Eminem that we know today broke out 3 or 4 years later. But also because the album is just pretty okay. There are lots of flashes of the artist that would be to come, but he was still putting the pieces together at that point. So there's nothing really remarkable here. It's more of a curiosity than anything, like the real first Eminem album. But there's really not much that you would want to revisit here. It's just something to check off your list to say that you checked out. But I can't even say much about it here in this recap. It's an album. It's early baby Eminem. It's like going back and looking at your pictures at grade school and you're like, ooh, why did I wear that outfit? That's how I feel listening to this album. It ain't bad, but you ain't missing nothing. Coming in at number 8 is Eminem's most recent album, Music to Be Murdered By. So this album had a lot going for it. I like the cool Hitchcock theme that it had. Eminem always kind of worked very well when he did kind of like the more horror type stuff. And I wouldn't say this is a horror album. It's not horrorcore by any means. But he just works well in like a darker atmosphere. That's the Eminem I like. More so than like the evil circus beats. We'll get to those in a minute. But the problem with this album is the problem that a lot of albums have in this modern era. Why is it so long? You chop 8 songs off of this and I might raise it a half a star because the good stuff is so good, but it's just so much extra. And then of course he came out with a deluxe edition with more extra stuff. Like, we don't need more. I know that extra pads out your streams and you can get on Billboard for like an extra week and oh, look how great this is performing. And I guess that's cool, but a guy like me, I care about legacy as far as great albums over where you are on a chart for a week. And an overall album that I had to listen to for like 2 hours and like only less than half as good, that's not getting it. There's some fun, really, really good songs here, and I'm saying that a lot about the later Eminem albums, because even when M is bad, he's still pretty good. But it's so unnecessarily long. This album has a lot of fans from kind of current Eminem stans. They love this one. But you can take or leave a lot of stuff on this for me. Coming in at number 7 is Kamikaze. To me, the best of the latter day Eminem albums. Let me tell you the story behind this one because it's kind of weird. If you remember, Revival came out, everybody was going crazy, and everybody labeled Eminem a fall off and a never was and a has been and a blah blah. Eminem, let me tell you something about Marshall Mathers. When he is mad, he is focused. And in less than a year, he was able to hit back at the critics with an album that was a lot more targeted because he was just gonna prove to these little kids that he's a great rapper. Good luck trying to prove anything to Twitter. But he gave it a good old college try, and it was definitely a step up from Revival. And in my opinion, one of the best of these albums of this era of M. Of course, it still has the issue of overwrapping Eminem syndrome.
Pickles on my Chick-fil-A. Ain't got no time today. Crunch you like Frito-Lay. Fat Albert. Hey, hey, hey.
Yeah, like that. But beyond that, this album was a lot more focused with a lot more trajectory when it comes to knowing what he wants to do. So we got some great songs out of this. Not Alike, love that song. The Ringer, a banger. Even the Venom song that became the soundtrack, the lead song for the Venom movie soundtrack, I thought that was a good guilty pleasure that grew on me over time. This was the Eminem that I liked, the one that was ferocious in his bars, but was able to have a little bit more focus than just rhyming toilet paper and every other random thing that he's going to do. The issue, though, it's the issue that a lot of his albums have in general, is there's a lack of consistency because M has this penchant to always have like the pop singers on it. The girls who are doing the hooks, and it just always comes off kind of samey to me, and that's really prevalent here on the second half of the album, so it starts feeling kind of the same before things pick up at the tail end. So, great album. Well, I won't say great album. It was a great return to form, as in M was trying to right the ship, but there was still a little bit too much things in his way, obstacles that could keep this from being the Eminem that we know that he could be. So it was a glimpse that M still had a little bit of gas in the tank. Again, he stumbled with music to be murdered by, but in my opinion, it proved that M still got a little bit for those fans. I mean, he's a legend for a reason, and this showed us that he can still do it at a high level. Sometimes. Coming in number 6 is Relapse. So this album has a weird legacy on the old internet because you know one thing about the internet, we gonna be fickle. Here's what happened. So when it dropped around 2009, this is his first album in about 5 years. You know, he was going through some things following Encore and a few other albums. So he cleaned himself up and he was able to get himself going with this album. And when it came out, I remember it being pretty well received. I was iffy on it, hence the score, but it was pretty well received. Then it came out that M was kind of like, I don't know how much I like this album. Then everybody was like, oh, that album's horrible, the album's trash. But then in more recent years, I've seen a lot of Eminem fans really kind of embrace this one again. So it has a real up and down, up and down, up and down love-hate relationship. And that really reflects the album itself because the album is a up and down, up and down, up and down album. There's some real good songs on it. I think 3 AM is one of Eminem's best songs that doesn't get the conversation. We talked earlier on Music Be Murdered By about those darker themed songs. That's 3 AM to me is one of those, the horror storytelling almost, the serial killerness. That is what Eminem really does well, and it kind of does picture painting better than anybody else. So I love that that's about it, but this is another album that is so long and so much filler that the good gets dragged down. So I can understand why a lot of big Eminem fans really like it because there's a lot to love if you ignore the stuff that isn't so great. And I can understand other people listening to it and be like, this song is good, this song ain't. This song is good, this song ain't. This song is good, this song ain't. This is really a reflection of that. And that's why the legacy of Relapse is kind of all over the place. As a comeback, I thought it was a decent comeback album, kind of like Kamikaze in that same vein, like a comeback that sort of worked, but not quite. And I think that he would definitely find his footing in later releases. Coming in at number 5, and I'm probably gonna get some grief for this one, but I don't care, it's my list. Marshall Mathers LP 2. So this album, I believe, dropped in 2013, and I can't remember exactly what I was doing. But a couple years ago, probably when I was doing my 2020 decade recaps, when I was looking at the 2010s, I was writing something where I was talking about the best albums of 2013, and either I had this at the top or near the top. And I remember hosts being so mad, like, how dare you? How dare you put this album as one of the best albums of 2013? And I'm like, cause it was? I really like this album. Listen, I am not a big fan of sequel albums. I think that you set yourself up for failure by comparing an album to an album of greater acclaim previously, because you can't recapture that magic. Eminem will never be able to put himself in the place he was in 2000 when he came out with the first Marshall Mathers LP. To try to do that is a unwinnable battle. So that's another reason why I'm side-eyeing this Confessions 2 Usher. Call it something else. I'm calling it Confessions 2. Anyway, it's weird and it doesn't always work when you try to have an album that bleeds off of another album's success, but this one worked as well as you can imagine. Eminem was able to kind of do some of the themes that were built upon that one and revisit them in a more mature light. So instead of crazy little boy Eminem, he's more of an adult and he's looking back and he's reflecting and maybe I shouldn't have said it like this, or here's why I was thinking that, and here's why I am at, 10 years later, I can reflect and look at life like this instead of like that. If you look at the deepness of the album from that perspective, I think it works. It's not really regarded highly by some because it's not filled with a bunch of hits. And we judge everything by hits. But if you look at the overall story being told and the consistency and the level of rapping, because M is on one on this album, I thought this was a very solid album and one that I considered the most underrated of his discography. Coming in at number 4 is Recovery. This is another album with a weird legacy because I remember it being super celebrated when it first came out. Now people just kind of forget about it. But I think it's a real win for M because this is the album that does what Relapse tried to do and does it well. So if Relapse was his introduction back into this new era of music, the early 2010s, the very infamous era where a lot of our legends were stumbling to find their way because the landscape was completely different and this new generation really weren't rocking with him. So he was trying to find his way. I think this is when he finally was able to stand on his own and deliver, in my opinion, one of the better albums of his career. I think, again, is one that's not celebrated because it's so different. It's not the type of album that really makes you think of an Eminem because it's a lot more thoughtful, kind of in the vein of Marshall Mathers 2, where it's a lot of maturity, and you don't think a lot. When you think of Eminem, you don't think of maturity. And this album, but it does it in a very, very well done way. The knock I do have against it is it's filled with those Eminem classic pop records that always chart super duper high, but be skip when I listen to them. So there's a ton of that I do not really get down with. But hey, it moves the numbers, so whatever. I'll take that over loading up an album with 50 filler songs. But besides that, Eminem really had something to say about growth, maturity, and recovering from all of his past transgressions. That's what this album is about. The story is well told, and it is another album that I feel like is pretty underrated. I think Marshall Mathers LP 2 is a little bit more underrated because this album did get a little bit of love due to the singles, but check it out. Seduction, oh, that was a song. I'm going to have to play that one when this is over. What a banger. Good album from him. Coming in at number 3 is the Slim Shady LP. I'll never forget the first time I heard My Name Is. It was late. It was probably 9:30 on the Virginia local radio station. Shout out to 103 Jams. They were playing at like 9. They would start playing the more hardcore hip hop, the more underground stuff. And they played this song from this weird sounding white guy. I thought it was a commercial. I didn't think it was an actual song. I thought it was like a parody or a commercial. And I'm listening to it and it's so goofy. I'm like, this is actually kind of a good commercial. Like, whoever did this commercial is actually talented. No, it wasn't a commercial. It was a song. It would be a hit song. My Name Is would put Eminem on the top of the charts and start his kind of ascent to the top of the game. We had never heard an artist to his level. It's not like Eminem invented white rap. We had definitely had white rappers before. But his level of lyrical talent was just unheard of. And you put Dre's beats behind him, this dude really was able to just connect. And I love that he was able to do so without sounding or making music like anybody else. You couldn't say that he was, oh, he's just a white version of Jay. Or, oh, this dude just a white Nas. Or he white Master P. Like, you couldn't do that. He was completely unique. And he was just weaving together these insane narratives. And he's going to kill this person. And he's doing this. It's like, what on earth is this man talking about? But he's able to do it because his creativity was through the roof. It's not the type of music that plays well today in our culture of making sure that everybody is, I don't want to say PC because there's a time for PC culture, but then sometimes y'all just fake and hypocritical about stuff. Sorry, but you are. So a lot of his stuff might not play very well today, and trust me, some of that stuff we shouldn't have been laughing at in 99 because some of that stuff didn't age well. But if you look beyond that, so it might be a difficult listen for first timers, you look beyond that and realize the context of the world at the time with South Park and just counterculture and anti-hero, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and just that grittier thing that we were going through in the world at the time. He was the perfect voice of that. And this album still stands up today. It's one of his most remembered, not his best, but because of it was able to capture that era so well. A great mainstream introduction for Eminem. Coming in at number 2, yes, it is Eminem, The Eminem Show. This album, for those who are around, know how big it was. If you weren't in that Eminem era, as I've been saying most of this video, a lot of this stuff might be over your head. You might not get the hype. You might be like, I don't see what the big deal is. You had to be there. And the Eminem Show, to me, is the album that is probably the best representation of mainstream Eminem. So you've got the deep, thoughtful cuts, the ones that reflect on society, and then just the usual goofishness that's just all over the place. Plus those freaking evil carnival beats. I like your M, but I'm tired of the evil carnival beats. These Joker beats, chill on them. We good. Regardless, this album was a masterpiece for putting out. If it's a representation of all of what Eminem is, this is a masterclass at that. It's not a perfect album by any means. I do remember at the time some of the critics were kind of poking holes in it. But it's one of his most beloved because I think it's also, along with being the one that's the most Eminem, is probably the most accessible as well. He also had he was able to do some of his more controversial elements without it being as scary. But he was also able to have the wit and the lyricism and all the things that pull together what makes Eminem a great MC. Last I checked, this thing was sold at like 12 million copies and rising. Good Lord. You think your albums, the guys you're standing over today are big time sellers with their little streams? They ain't selling 12 million albums with no streams, player. Hits different. Eminem was an absolute star by this point in his career in 2002. And this is the pinnacle of that. It's not his best album, But when it comes to his stardom, it's at the top. And yes, coming in at number 1 is the Marshall Mathers LP. By 1999, 2000, Eminem was the man America loved to hate, and he reveled in every bit of it. The reason why this album is just so well done is because it's a reflection of this tortured soul, this tortured young man who is just struggling with his personal life and his child and his baby mama and his mama and his place in hip-hop in general. And it's just this anger that comes with all of that. But beyond that, there's almost a little bit of empathy you have with him because you understand his journey. He's not trying to be someone he's not. I've seen a lot of people on social media try to say, oh, he's trying to be black and he's trying to do this. No, he is just giving a representation of his life, which of course has some elements of the black community because he lived there. He will never know what it's like to live in this skin. Absolutely not. But he will reflect his world around him. So while it might not look like my world, I can definitely see elements of how it influenced him. I can empathize with some of the crazy stuff he's gone through. And sometimes I can shake my head and say, dude, what are you saying? You lost your mind. But I have never heard peak Eminem. When you listen to peak Eminem, I don't think I've ever heard a rapper as captivating, who can tell stories like he can, who can be as honest as he can be, who can just weave these tales. It's like, where is this stuff coming from? And we don't have any of the crazy over-rapping. The goofiness is at a minimum. It's there, but it's at a minimum. But it's just such an incredible autobiographical piece of a really, really disturbed dude who's trying to find his way that resonated with so much of America around him. We talked about the previous album, the Slim Shady LP, being a reflection of the times. This album was even more, and that's why it was so embraced. And to me, it's the album he still hasn't topped. Is it his most commercially successful? Not quite. It's close to Eminem Show, but not quite. But to me, this is the album when we talk about what's the big deal with Eminem. You listen to this album, you'll see what the big deal is. You might not relate to his story, but you'll respect it, and you'll respect him as an MC. My opinion, by far, the best Eminem LP to date. And that's it, players. That is Eminem's LPs ranked from bottom to top. I know y'all got opinions on this one. So let me know in the comments what you think, what his best album is. Do you think Eminem Show is his best album? You might. Do you think Revival or should have been at the absolute bottom? Probably. Do you think Encore was better than I said? Maybe. Let us know in the comments because I know you're going to say something. I know you're going to say something. This edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions is a wrap. Play on, players.